This is your Thursday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. We have a lot to talk about today. It's a very busy time of the year, and it's been made busier by a lot of the local teams making news, not just on the field, but off the field as well. Be joined here in a little bit by Marcus Fuller, who helps cover college basketball, does a great job of it at the Star Tribune. We're going to break down the men's Sweet 16, the women's Sweet 16, and take a look at Ben Johnson after one season, 1 year, in fact, after he's been hired by the Gophers as their men's basketball coach. What is in store for year 2 with Ben Johnson and things of that nature. So looking forward to that visit with Marcus Fuller here in just a little bit. Have a little Wolves talk towards the end of the show. Lost to Phoenix on Wednesday night. Not the end of the world, but damaging to their hopes of getting into the top 6. Phoenix, a very good team, but they were without Chris Paul. Wolves were up by 13 at halftime in a very, I think, immature is the right way to put it, entire game from the Wolves, but particularly the second half. They did not seem like they were ready for the intensity to ramp up, and I'll get into that here in a little bit as well. But first, what did I miss? Couple of notable news conferences on Wednesday. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings general manager, met with the media to talk about their offseason, which has recently included the signing of Zadarius Smith. And Carlos Correa met with reporters on Wednesday as well, and kind of talked through the process of how he arrived at signing with the Twins, that kind of stunner over the weekend. I want to start with the Adofo-Mensah press conference and then get into Correa here in a little bit. I thought one interesting thing that came from the Vikings news conference was basically Kwesi Adofo-Mensah acknowledging that they are trying to basically rebuild on the fly. They don't want to take a step back while they're rebuilding, while they're retooling this roster. And it's an ambitious task. It's a dangerous thing to try to pull off, I think, just because it leaves you vulnerable to, leaving yourself in that squishy kind of middle where you're never quite getting over the hump, but you're never bottoming out and getting some of those kind of premium draft picks that might allow you to start over, particularly at quarterback. But let's hear from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah as he answered kind of the question of navigating this offseason and what the team's kind of outlook and plan is.
I think when people look at teams, they can sometimes do it in a very binary way. And they ask, are you either all in or are you tearing it down and rebuilding? And I don't really look at the world that way. I kind of try and, the way we look at it is we're trying to navigate both worlds. We're trying to live in today and tomorrow, or the competitive rebuild, however you want to phrase it or market it. And so I think that's kind of how we've approached this offseason and our time horizons going forward.
Now, the logical follow-up to that, like I mentioned a little while ago, is how do you avoid the sort of mediocrity that has plagued the Vikings, frankly, for the last 4 seasons since Kirk Cousins arrived? That's been exactly where they have existed these last 4 years. The Vikings in the past 4 seasons, 33-30-1 in the regular season. That's the very definition of mediocre. They've only made the postseason 1 time. So how do you avoid being in that mediocrity? And again, he was asked that, and here is how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah answered that question.
That's a great question. One of the people that I've become close with over the years is Sam Hinkie. And obviously, I think when he inherited that 76er team, people kind of thought that they were that way, that 8 seed in the Eastern Conference, when you're just kind of mired in, a place of mediocrity. Football's a little bit different deal. It's more of a team sport. You don't need that one transcendent player to, become great. But, to your point, it's just about adding great pieces, great players around the core that we have. And there's ways to do that. There's ways to do that in free agency or the draft or the trade market or player development. And so we're just being careful about that, understanding the reality of where we are and what things give us the odds of getting where we want to be. I know that's kind of a general answer, but, no, there is no fear. There's no fear of a problem as long as you understand the depth of the problem and really how to solve it.
Now, listen, it is possible to do that. It is possible to build something better than what they have been, and they haven't been terrible, of course. They've been in contention for a playoff spot in largely in all of those seasons, even when they didn't come to fruition. So I get why you want to give yourself a chance, and I see, if they looked across the river in St. Paul, they would probably see a team that has managed to finesse that. The Wild, a lot of us were clamoring for them to totally tear this thing down, and they've managed to kind of change their identity, change their roster without ever bottoming out, and right now I believe they are a bona fide playoff contender, a team that with the right set of breaks could make a pretty deep run in the playoffs this year. If they get the right performances, if they get hot at the right time, they can do that. So it is possible, but it is a dangerous place to live. And the symbol of all this, like I said a little while ago, is Kirk Cousins, the quarterback they are paying a lot of money, the quarterback that they extended for at least another year into the 2023 season now. With their moves this offseason. A lot of this status quo roster building, which I think is partly, not just Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's philosophy or Kevin O'Connell's philosophy. It is being directed from the top down by ownership. But if that's the space they're going to live in, that's the risk they take, and Kirk Cousins being the symbol of that. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah addressed the Kirk Cousins contract extension in his news conference Wednesday as well.
And I'll probably never get up here and talk about calls that are made here or not made here. But I will say that, when I got to this building and when I thought about team building with Kevin, it was really just about, we have a really good player. I met with Mike, his agent, and we had a great dinner. We have a personal mutual connection, so we got along great. We just talked about forming a partnership together and seeing how high we can take this thing together, adding stability at that position, which is a really important position. Kevin has this great term, we do things on our terms. We do things on our terms on the field, and I also think that applies to team building. And so, getting him in the fold, getting him to buy in, I think that was really it was a win-win solution. Again, he gave up things. But to make this partnership work, and we're excited to have him.
So again, it's not impossible that the Vikings will compete in next season and be, a playoff team. But I just don't see the ceiling of this team being anything higher than get into the playoffs and maybe feel fortunate to win one playoff game. And is that where you want to be? Maybe that's good for job security, but is that good in your ultimate goal of trying to win a Super Bowl? I don't think so. This just doesn't feel like a Super Bowl caliber roster, and maybe you need to tread water for a little while until you figure out exactly what direction you want to go, until you can actually do some meaningful things with the salary cap. I get that, but I don't like where they are necessarily right now. I do like the Zadarius Smith signing. I think that was a good move. It feels like they're making some real strides with the defense, but overall, a little bit too much status quo for my taste this offseason, like we've talked about a few more times in previous podcasts. And interesting to me that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah basically acknowledged where they are right now and what they are trying to do, and it will be a pretty tall task for them to accomplish what they really want to accomplish this year. Let's move on to the Carlos Correa news conference. I thought a couple things were interesting in that. One, didn't realize how much success he has had at Target Field over the years and how that may be factored into this decision. He has a career OPS at Target Field of 1.205. Yeah, that's not bad. That is the highest of any Major League ballpark he has played in his career. It's just 70 plate appearances, but that's a lot. He had 5 homers and 70 plate appearances. Says he sees the ball really well at Target Field. So that's something to consider as we think about all this. The second thing, I thought he gave some good insights into how this deal came together. It came together very fast. One night, all of a sudden, he's on a Zoom call, and let's just let Carlos Correa take it from there.
Yeah, for us, it was a hectic night, to say the least. I remember Scott walking to the house around 6 p.m., and then by 10 p.m. we were in the Zoom call. And, before getting on the Zoom call, I walked into the room. My wife was breastfeeding the baby, trying to put him to sleep. And I said, babe, there might be a big chance that we're going to Minnesota. He's like, just like that? Like, really? Like that quick? And I'm like, yeah, we're going to get on a Zoom call right now. So she got in the Zoom call for a little bit. I talked to Rocco. I talked to, Derek and Thad. And, they made me feel like this was the place for me to be. They made me feel like this was going to be my next home. And, when I got out the Zoom call, I told Scott, let's make it happen. And I told my wife, let's start packing. We're going to Minnesota, and we're going to go out there and have fun and help the organization win. So here we are, super excited.
So again, I don't know how long he's going to be here, right? He's got this contract that's 3 years, but it's got opt-outs after the first 2 years. He might just be here for 1 year if he gets if he has a really good year and gets a massive payday from somebody else and he opts out next season. But for now, if he can be healthy, let's just enjoy this. This is a Gold Glove caliber shortstop. He's won a Gold Glove before. He's an excellent hitter. He makes this team better in 2022. That is the bottom line right now. If he's healthy, if Byron Buxton is healthy, this is a team that has some bona fide superstar potential on the roster, and difference makers are what get you wins in the postseason. So we will see how that plays out. It all came together fast, and maybe the 2022 Twins will also come together fast and be better than we think.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
Happy to be joined on Daily Delivery today by Marcus Fuller. Does a great job covering college basketball for the Star Tribune. I wanted to talk Sweet 16s with you, Marcus, and maybe a little bit of Gophers men's basketball as well, because I noticed you wrote something today about the 1-year anniversary of Ben Johnson's hire. But let's start, Marcus, with the men's Sweet 16. And what was your impression of the first 4 days of action in that tournament?
Well, obviously, not having any local connection as far as the Gophers doesn't mean that we're not excited about college basketball and March Madness on the men's side. The Big Ten, we had 9 teams in the tournament, and to see them fall by the wayside one by one, I know it was tough, especially for Iowa fans, seeing Iowa lose in the first round after winning the Big Ten tournament. But I think having 2 teams still left in the Sweet 16 for the Big Ten still means that Final Four berth and possibly a national championship, the end of the national championship drought back to 2000 is still a possibility. Michigan is obviously a team that not many people thought would even make the tournament. The way they were playing at the end of the year, and Juwan Howard being suspended for what happened in the handshake line versus Wisconsin. But they're back in the Sweet 16 for the 5th straight year. Actually, when I saw that stat, I had to remind myself, how successful Michigan has continued to be under Juwan Howard, taking over from the John Beilein era. And obviously Purdue is a team that a lot of us thought at the beginning of the year was a national championship Final Four contender. So it's not a huge surprise that they're in the Sweet 16, but the way the upsets were happening, everybody was vulnerable. And obviously the most vulnerable ended up being Kentucky, who lost to St. Peter's in the first round. And St. Peter's is still playing as a Cinderella story in the Sweet 16. So those are the things that stand out to me so far. And my Final Four is still intact. So I feel pretty good about that.
Well, at least you got that going for you. And it was a fair amount of upsets. St. Peter's was certainly St. Peter's over Kentucky in that first round, definitely qualified as the biggest surprise. And then, like you said, they're still around, one of the a Cinderella team to be sure. Another interesting team that made it to the Sweet 16, Iowa State, right? I mean, Gabe Kalsher and his Cyclones knocking off Wisconsin, another one of those Big Ten teams that fell.
Yeah, I mean, it just had to be Gabe knocking out the rival Badgers, right? I mean, if you listen to him or saw what he had to say after the game, he said, I'm a Minnesotan. I don't like Wisconsin, and he had that, a chip on his shoulder going into the game, playing Brad Davison, who feels like he's been playing the Gophers as a Minnesotan for the last 20 years. That rivalry continued for him with the Cyclones, and obviously they would not have advanced without him. He had 22 points in the game, helped shut down Badgers All-America Johnny Davis. It's a great story for him. Leaving Minnesota was tough. Ben Johnson and Dave Thorson were close to him, having recruited him, and he had played for Dave Thorson, so leaving wasn't easy. He needed a change of scenery, and they went from 2 wins last year at Iowa State without TJ Otzelberger to 22 wins this year in the Sweet 16. It's just an incredible turnaround for the program.
Chet Holmgren and Gonzaga have been pretty much as advertised so far, but things will get a little tougher for them now in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I really thought that the second round matchup versus Memphis was going to be a scare. I didn't realize how much of a scare when they're down 10 at halftime.
Right.
But when you see the athleticism and length and disruptive ability, the capability defensively that Memphis had under Penny Hardaway, you weren't shocked by it. You kind of figured that they would the offensive juggernaut that they are, that they would come to life in the second half. And Drew Timme definitely did that. Put the team on his back and carried them like he did to the Final Four and championship game last year. And Chet Holmgren just does what he does. He protects the rim. He's a matchup nightmare offensively. And he's going to continue to be a major part of their success if they want to continue to advance.
Kind of interesting, just looking at the brackets and the different regions, just all over the map in terms of seeding. You got the West where it's been all chalk so far. The top 4 seeds still intact. And then the East, you got the 8, the 4, the 3, and the 15 are still alive. It just kind of goes to show it, even this time of year. And then you got Michigan still alive as an 11. And then in the Midwest, Iowa State and Miami, an 11 against a 10, will have a chance to go to the Elite Eight. It kind of show that that's how the tournament's supposed to work, right?
Well, I think this year is probably going to be something that we'll look back on and say, hey, why was that the case? And some of it is COVID. They have a lot of fifth year, some maybe in cases 6-year seniors, guys that extend their college basketball career. There's a lot more experience in the tournament that there ever has been. It might not all be NCAA tournament experience, but it's definitely college basketball experience. And you saw last year's defending champion Baylor get knocked out in the second round by North Carolina, but North Carolina, they have a new coach, but they have a lot of experience on their team, and they're a dangerous team. UCLA obviously, had experience playing in the Final Four last year, and they brought a lot of guys back. Purdue, up and down their roster, a lot of guys have played together for a number of years, and so I think we're seeing that in college basketball more than ever. A lot of these double-digit seeds are high major teams that maybe were highly ranked at one time during the year, and then they kind of fell a little bit in conference play as to how tough it always is in high major conference play, and then they've kind of battled back with that experience.
Any one matchup you're looking forward to in particular on as the tourney resumes?
Well, I'm selfish. I just continue to look at my bracket and see where I could see to avoid upsets. And Texas Tech and Duke is a game that a lot of people, when they look at this last the last dance for Coach K, and they want to see him. I don't know about all of us, but some people just hate Duke and they want to see them lose. I feel like even the people that hate Duke they want to see, they've got to see Coach K go out on the right foot, right? But for me,
not me, but okay.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah, I just kind of felt a little bit sorry for him when he lost his last home game at Cameron Indoor Stadium, and then they lost the conference tournament. But again, I wasn't going to have him knocked out in the first round or the second round. But I do that matchup with Texas Tech. I just felt like if Texas Tech made it through, that defensively they'd just give Duke all kinds of trouble, and I don't see Duke getting past that Sweet 16. So that's a big matchup. I think if they can get back past Texas Tech, then they could give Gonzaga some trouble in the Elite Eight, and that would be a really neat matchup because Gonzaga and Duke had already met earlier this year, and Duke beat them. I believe that was their first loss, and that was kind of a nice matchup between Paolo Banchero and Chet Holmgren, who were at the time the top candidates for the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. So if they were able to meet again in the Elite Eight, that'd be kind of neat. But again, we still have Purdue in it, we still have Michigan in it, and so I'm watching them closely. Matt Payne has really never been able to get past the hump or get over the hump and make it to the Elite Eight or past the Elite Eight and get to the Final Four. Remember a few years ago when we had the Final Four in Minneapolis, they ended up losing to Chris Beard, and Texas Tech, and he ends up beating Chris Beard in Texas this year to get to the Sweet 16. So maybe that's a sign of things to come. I would hope so, even though it's not in my bracket for Purdue to make it to the Elite Eight, because I had them losing to Kentucky. Since Kentucky's not in it, I feel like they have a good chance versus St. Peter's.
Nothing worse than those games where you have neither team alive, right?
Yeah, but when they're playing St. Peter's, like nobody
Right.
had St. Peter's, so we're
That's
good
true.
there. Yeah,
You're not losing any points on St. Peter's, probably. Well,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
should be fun viewing this weekend as we get down to the Final Four. On the women's side, there's been a fair number of upsets as well. We saw Iowa go out. Caitlin Clark, such a great player for the Hawkeyes, and maybe selfishly we were hoping that she and Iowa might get to Minneapolis, because that Final Four starts here in Minneapolis in a little over a week. What have you taken note of over in that bracket?
Well, you just said it. There rarely are upsets of that magnitude. I feel like going into this tournament for the women, one of the storylines we felt like was that don't expect to see a lot of the top seeds get knocked off early, and then that's exactly what happened. I don't know if they got inspired by the men's, seeing St. Peter's win in that first round versus Kentucky, but we haven't seen, that necessarily a blue blood like that go out. Iowa, I think, had a really good run this year with Caitlin Clark. Were they a typical 2 seed? I'm not sure, but I know who was a typical 2 seed. I felt like Baylor was a typical 2 seed, and to see them get upset already, was huge. One of their top player, Nalissa Smith, was a number 1 pick in the WNBA draft candidate. So to see them, get knocked out, that was surprising. I think obviously if you go back to the Iowa game, seeing that play out the way it did on their home floor, I was watching that game and I'm thinking, wow, this is what's different about the women's tournament. You have these top seeds playing on their home floor. So,
Sure.
Watching them get upset, watching LSU lose as well, that was a shocker. So I think, some of these top seeds, getting knocked off, makes it intriguing in the Sweet 16. Ohio State ended up beating LSU, so that's a Big Ten foe that the Gophers fans are familiar with. That's in the Spokane region where defending champion Stanford is. So if they end up continue to advance, you might see them, battling out trying to get to the Elite Eight. But there's just a lot of intrigue here. I believe four Big Ten teams are in the Sweet 16. So again, a really good showing on the women's side this year. I believe they had 5 or 6 a year ago. Correct me if I'm wrong. So with that kind of numbers, maybe you'll see someone, continue to advance and maybe pull off an upset to try to get to the Final Four. It would be really nice to see a Big Ten team in the Final Four. But if we can't have a Big Ten team, then Paige Beckers, making it with UConn, not only getting UConn back to prominence because they haven't won a national title since 2016. Just
Right.
her coming back from her injury, we kind of felt bad that maybe this season with the Final Four being in Minneapolis, she wouldn't be able to play. But I don't want to say completely back to form, but she's getting there. And this is a dangerous UConn team. Everybody's complaining because they're playing in Connecticut, which is pretty much their home floor. So a home court advantage. So I think that might play, into UConn's favor, getting through the Sweet 16 and possibly a Final Four. So that'd be a good story there.
It sure would. Well, whoever makes it here, that will be a fun weekend of women's college basketball here a week from Friday. That begins. The teams get here even earlier than that. Marcus, before I let you go, you wrote recently about Ben Johnson being here for 1 year. Time flies. It feels like it was not that long ago that he was introduced, and they went through a whole season, of course, and now the off season is. As you kind of think about that first year and whether it's things that stood out to you or lessons that he learned, what comes to mind as you think about that?
Well, yeah, that was actually a story. I tweeted it, on the 1 year anniversary, but I had done it last year on the fact that going back to his coaching roots.
Right.
A lot of the coaches that he that he was on staff for. They saw different parts of his acumen that kind of set himself up for the future, which was to lead his own program, whether it was on the recruiting trail or just, picking their brain about certain parts of building a program. And now you're getting to see it for yourself. This year they didn't finish how they wanted to. Last place in the Big Ten is exactly where they were predicted. I would say that the way the season started, like we've said many times on this podcast, that was not a last place in the Big Ten team. They went through injuries, they went through different COVID issues. Obviously, they have a lack of depth in the first place, so that contributed to them falling to the bottom of the Big Ten. And there were some teams at the bottom, like Nebraska and Northwestern, that were better than people thought. I would say, though, that it's funny that the anniversary of his hiring comes on the day where he was in attendance at Target Center watching one of his recruits, Braden Carrington, advance in the state tournament, because that's just who Ben is. He's just not going to sleep. He's going to always be recruiting and trying to build his program. Yes, they've already got Braden Carrington, but just coming out there and supporting him. I heard he sent messages to all the high school coaches that are competing in the state tournament and wish them good luck. And it just goes a long way, to building like that support. And with Minnesota high school coaches, players, he's going to take, a lot of time to repair what Richard Pitino did as far as, not getting the best players in the state. But he's off to a good start. And Braden Carrington has a good chance to win a state championship this year. So that's a really good image for the program. I remember the last two players to win state titles for the Gophers from Minnesota, Daniel Turu and Amir Coffey, ended up doing pretty well, making the NCAA tournament in their freshman year. I don't know if that's going to happen with this team, but you never know. With the transfer portal, they're hot on the portal right now. They could add up to 4 players, possibly with the portal. And, I think they have the chance to make a big jump next year. And lastly, I'll say is, it's hard to build a program without a huge piece, and they have that with Jamison Battle, who was their leading scorer last year from Minnesota. He's one of the better players in the Big Ten, and I felt like he was an all Big Ten snub. I think he should have been one of the 12 best players in the Big Ten.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought he was all year too, maybe hard when the team finishes as it did, but he carried them for stretches, and he is definitely a bright spot for the future. Well, Marcus, good stuff as always. Good catching up with you, and enjoy the games this weekend.
Yeah, it should be fun. Thanks a lot.
Good catching up with Marcus Fuller, as always, does a tremendous job, as do all of our writers covering the college basketball tournaments. We're going to have a ton of coverage next week of the women's Final Four when it arrives a week from Friday, and so look for all of that as well. Let's finish with the cooler. Timberwolves lost to Phoenix on Wednesday night at Target Center. Like I mentioned, not a ton of shame in that. Phoenix, by far and away, the best team in the league this season. They've withstood injuries and absences. Chris Paul was out last night. Didn't matter. They still beat the Wolves. Wolves were up by 13 at the break, but this became a chippy game towards the end of the first half. Phoenix kind of changed the edge in this game, got the Wolves kind of into their own heads, and that's a dangerous place for them to be. That's where the Wolves are most vulnerable, where other teams have exploited their weaknesses and kind of caught them griping about the refs, getting too emotional. It's a Karl Anthony Towns problem, and it filters on down. They try to keep themselves on task, but it got away from them on Wednesday night. That was a game they could have won. That was a game they should have won. That was a game they were somewhat in control of until their emotions got the best of them and until Phoenix started to assert its will and show them how these games, these late season games, these playoff games, how locked in you have to be. And I didn't think the Wolves were locked in the second half. I could feel a vibe immediately from the start of that second half that Phoenix was going to make a run and maybe come back on them. They just didn't seem to have the intensity they needed. They didn't match Phoenix's urgency, energy, or execution. And that's a good lesson for them to learn, right? Better now than in the postseason, but they have to learn that lesson soon because the playoffs are not far away. The play-in is likely to be the first step in that because losing these last 2 games to Dallas and Phoenix has pushed them further down in the standings. Likely to be the number 7 seed, have a couple cracks in that play-in round to get into the postseason, to get into the playoffs. But they have to learn their lessons by the time they get to the playoffs because there are no do-overs once you get to the postseason. If you lose enough times, your season is over and the lessons extend to the next year. That will do it for today's show. Randy Johnson should be with me on Friday to talk college hockey. Gophers against UMass Friday night in the first game of the NCAA men's hockey tournament for them. Talk plenty of other Minnesota college hockey storylines as well going into that tournament. So that should be a good conversation with Randy Johnson. Thanks so much for joining me here on Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. We'll see you again on Friday.